Thanks so much for joining us, Bryan.
Dude, so pumped to be here.
Yay! So pumped. I love it. Uh, I met Bryan through A-Fest, which, if you've listened to the show, you've heard mentioned 1,700 times. I've had like 50 A-Festers on here, but we didn't get to know each other well at A-Fest. However, a former guest, Dominic Quartuccio, and Bryan started a podcast, and I love what they're doing, and I'll let him describe a little bit more. And I loved having Dominic on, and he's got a great story. And I just, without even asking, said, I know Bryan's got a great quitting story. It's in there somewhere. And so I said, hey, do you want to be on the show? Didn't ask him what it was, which is half the fun. I said, do you want to be on the show? And he was game for it. So I am stoked that you are here, Bryan.
Oh, I am pumped. I said that earlier. I'm also very anxious to be here. So I think we're going to dive into some things today that maybe we're going to find some insights along the way. We'll get into my story. I think that I've heard several of your podcasts. I've seen some of your social media posts, and my initial reaction when I saw "Quit Happens" was first of all I was like, oh, it rhymes with shit. That's funny. I like that. That like got the immediate like button just for
Yay.
that. Right. So the quit happens, but then also it triggered something in me where I was like, no, quitting's bad. I'm not sure why Lynn Marie's doing like this whole thing where it's like negative, but like this whole quit idea, I don't like it. And then I realized why. Because I think, and you're gonna have to tell me this, but there's a solid chance that I am the world's worst quitter. I think I hold that esteemed position in the quit world.
because because you don't quit things, because that would make you the world's worst quitter. Is if you
That's
just stay
exactly
with
it.
things. Okay.
That's exactly, and I don't know what the opposite. I actually don't know what the opposite of a quitter is, like in the context of what we're
Oh,
talking
it's
about. But
it's
I
a
feel like
settler.
a settler, maybe that's a good one. That feels really shitty too. Um, yeah, yeah, okay.
So when I asked you to come on, what went through your head? Like, what am I going to talk about?
The very first thing that went through my head was, damn it. Now I'm going to have to actually take a look inside at all of these anxious moments in my life where like what do I quit? Do I not quit? What do I? And I gotta look at this. And I knew I had to say yes. I knew, not because I love you, not because of AFES connections, but I knew this was that uncomfortable edge that I feel quite often where I'm like, yeah, that's the place in life we got to go.
Yes.
So that was my initial reaction was like, no, why did you ask me? Why? No, like, but here we are, and we are going to talk about all kinds of quitting.
I love how all of that, no, why did you ask me, was not texted to me. It was just like, sure.
That was
Thanks.
the
That'll
internal
be
part,
awesome.
screaming. Yes.
These very often I have been told after, people finish and then they take off the headsets, they look at me, they're like, that was like a therapy session because a lot
Yeah.
of people don't go to these places that often. And that's why I so thoroughly appreciate people like yourself and all the other guests who really have to like dive into that place that somehow kind of goes unexamined a lot of the times
Yeah.
to share with the audience that, like, hey, we're all in this together. We've all had those rough spots. I mean,
Mm.
I shared with Bryan something I'm going to talk about on a podcast that will probably come out before this one, but just yesterday I quit my job. And that was a big one,
A
and like
real big
a
one.
real big one, 9 years coming. And, we all have those times that are just like, man, right before the quit was not pretty and a lot of internal things going on. And finally, your health wins out, at least in my case. Like when my health starts going, that's who
Mm.
I listen to.
That's your indicator.
Exactly, exactly. If I
How
could
are you? Just because
go
this
ahead.
is so relevant right now, I promise to keep my questions to a
No,
minimum.
it's
How are
fine.
you? How are you feeling right now? I mean, you just quit a very big, long position, like,
Yes, and
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 prestigious. Like,
prestigious. Yeah, yeah, it's kind of a sought after gig I had, where I was making definitely enough to survive on in 10 hours a week. And I never thought I would quit without having something else completely firmed up, ready to go, no fear of a gap in salary. But I'm practicing what I preach because I tell everybody, please get that gap in salary taken care of before you quit, unless, big fat asterisk here,
mm,
unless your health is suffering. And then you got to do what you got to do.
ah, boy.
Yeah. And when my health started suffering, in the form of, let's say, 12 hours of crying a week ago when, like one little thing triggers me at work and it made me anxious that I was going to lose my job. Like, oh, are they targeting me to quit? And then I was like, why are you so anxious about losing a job you have never wanted? And it has
Wow.
made you anxious for 9 years. And it's literally just because I was hanging on to it as this, kind of, it was like a golden handcuff slash complete security blanket because it paid all my bills. I live by myself in Southern California. I have extreme student loans I have to pay back. Like, it seems completely irresponsible to just quit that without another thing that's ready to go. But I'm not going to cry for 12 hours again over a thing like that.
Mm.
I can't, like it was essentially like a come to Jesus moment that my body was like, we're going to cry until you pay attention.
Did it feel like a choice or something that just had to happen?
It did not feel like a choice because I was in my office when the crying started. This is sorry to everybody who's going to hear this now twice, but whatever. I was in my office when I got this email that seemed like it was really targeting me, and it was really not a kosher email. It was like, you've done something wrong, but with no specific feedback, and it literally just said, spend more time on it. And essentially, that sounded like somebody was telling me I was being lazy. And I was like, I know how much time I spent on this. If you didn't specifically like a thing about it, tell me what was wrong with it. But don't just say, spend more time on it, and then CC my boss. Like, it just seemed like somebody's trying to take me down, right? It was like
office politics.
Right? And after 9 years of realizing that, like, I work for the Department of Defense, somebody can pull the plug on me at any time. Like, oh, this was unsatisfactory. You've done enough unsatisfactory work over the 9 years of, whatever. They could pull the plug. That's the most anxious feeling. And like what I tell people, when I'm counseling other people is anxiety is not a comfort zone to live in. It might be your familiar zone, but it's not where you should be. And yet I was suffering through this, I traded like, okay, I've got this nice salary for these few hours a week, but there was a constant anxiety about every time I was there, and every time I thought about the fact that I had to go back to there, and every time I thought about the fact that they could pull the plug at any time. There was nothing really secure about the security blanket I had.
One thing you don't know about me, not many people in the AFES community do, is I spent 13 years at Accenture, and 10 of those years I was in the talent strategy space, largely in leadership development. And so I have all these like really fun facts and figures when it comes to like works and jobs and everything else. And then you may know this fact, but Mondays have the highest rate of heart attacks in the U.S.
I did not
because
know
people
that.
have that feeling. They know that they got to get up and go. They know they got to go into a life where they're really not living what they are and who they are and what they want to be. They can't really identify what that is, but they know that it doesn't feel good. And all of a sudden, heart goes out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what we're dealing with. Like, this whole like quit thing, this whole identity, this whole what we do, or why we do what we do is a health concern. And I love that you are so tapped into that and you have the experiences to see that.
Well, it's from my own life. I mean, every time that I've been in a situation that's super out of alignment, and again, like I was just saying, there's the amount of out of alignment versus the benefit, kind of the cost benefit ratio. And when I was in a startup and I was getting essentially no benefit because there's no money coming in, I'm just working all day, every day. And there was so much anxiety because of, first off, the fact that I was, we weren't progressing and I was not necessarily getting along with the co-founder all the time. I started having massive anxiety. Then it became panic attacks. Then it became insomnia. And like, everything just starts to unravel. And I'm like, what's happened? I've spent so much time in my life, like getting all these degrees and all this experience to be like crying on the floor in the middle of the day, like unable to function. And you brought up a great point. I always think about, so I work Mondays and Tuesdays. I could work any 2 days of the week, right? But I picked Mondays and Tuesdays because I wanted to get it over with. But that, of course, leaves me with the whole Monday complex, just like everybody else. But mine would start in Sunday, and I hadn't yet. This is before Sunday scaries was like a term people talked about. But my insomnia would be the worst on Sunday nights. And so I just happened to write to a friend of mine who was in med school, and she's like, oh, yeah, that's known that's like the worst night of insomnia is Sunday night. And yeah, of course, parts of it is because your weekend sleep was disturbed, but I bet a ton of it is that whole fear of Mondays. And I think that's also why Sunday Fun Day became such a thing, because people just want to numb themselves through the Sunday scaries.
Numb it out before it hits. Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
It's
and
like,
then starts the cycle again.
Yeah. And it was when I started having that massive Monday insomnia where I actually tried quitting the VA before when I was in the startup, because I thought that was what was causing all my anxiety. Well, for sure it wasn't helping, but it turns out the startup was causing more of it and giving me no income. So I had taken just like what I call a mini quit. I took a month off of the VA and realized, oh, my anxiety is not gone. it's clearly something else. And I advocate the mini quit if you're not exactly sure what's causing it. But at this point, I was pretty darn sure after 9 years, and that email had just sent me in like this crying thing that wouldn't end. Like the whole day went by, and like every time I would kind of think about it or anything else, it just was just like, why are you not in integrity? Like you're just holding on to this thing. You know there's something out there for you, and you know that like your health is starting to suffer. And if your best friend came to you with this or a client came to you with this, you would say trust in the universe. The universe will support you. People have got your back. Do what you need for your health. And so finally, that's what I did.
Man, it's not as much as when I heard that you quit, it felt like freedom, which it did. Like that felt like freedom. The story that you're telling me now of this like Sunday scaries is just, I almost don't want to breathe. I'm going to take a deep breath so I don't pass out during the podcast. So, okay.
Exactly.
And we're back.
So Bryan, when you
mentioned that you have a lot of degrees.
What's
that?
Oh yeah, sorry. Skype cut out for just a second. You were saying what?
I thought you mentioned in that story that you have a lot of degrees, and when I looked up your profile, you reminded me. Have you ever played the video game called Sims?
I've heard of it.
You've heard of it? Okay, so it's something I played like in high school, and it's where you're a little character in a world, you're building houses, and you have a career, and eventually you make your way through the career, and you like get to the top of the ladder, and you have a choice to stay there or go take a different career. And so you could be an astronaut, you could be a doctor, you could be a lawyer, you can be a guard, you can do a million different things. And I feel like you're the real life Sim. Like you've actually done it. You've actually done it all. Like you're like, I'm gonna be, I don't know. Like most people have a life dream of like, I'm gonna be a doctor. You're like, yeah, I'm gonna do that. And then I'm gonna do a lawyer, and then I'm gonna do a coach, and then I'm gonna do, I'm gonna do the next thing. You're like that transition phase again. I find it amazing, fascinating. So hopefully there's a therapist in the background because that's what we're going to go through today.
Oh, well, I think that's part of the coaching is just, people say, like, oh, did you go through a coaching academy? And I'll be very upfront. Like I had a coach who helped me, learn how to officially do coaching, but between medicine, I mean, I have been therapizing people I've had my medical degree for 14 years. A big part of, I was in family medicine, and, a big part of that is just figuring out like, okay, for me, it was always important to figure out what's behind the symptoms you're having. And that's essentially just what I'm telling people with the quits. Like, hey, if your symptoms are anxiety, let's take a step back and not just like treat your anxiety.
Right.
What's causing it that needs to be quit. And I just put, like you said, I specifically call it quit because it makes you stop and take notice. If I called this the Live Your Best Life podcast, nobody would notice because everybody tells you to live your best life, right? Like, obviously, don't do things that cause you anxiety. But nobody's addressing the fact that, like, let's figure out what is causing you anxiety and help you quit that because a lot of times that's the pain point where people get stuck.
Love it.
Yeah. So, anyway, my friend, when you realized, oh, my God, I have to be on this podcast.
Yeah.
Did any of your past quitting, transition processes, etc., come to mind that you thought would be valuable to share?
Yeah, this is it immediately came up to me. And now Dominic Cortuccio, I currently run a sexual health company. I've been in this space for several years, and so I speak publicly on topics like dicks, like Me Too, like gender discrimination, like equality, like some of these high charging like topics.
Yes.
Right? And so I have no problem talking in public about my personal stories of the past and lessons that I've learned. But this story, like what came up for me when you asked, is something I have not shared publicly.
Oh.
And has nothing to do with sex or penises or anything else that I typically talk about. Consent, none of that. But this was a me story. And I'm going to go back to, I was at the University of Iowa, and it was my sophomore year. That was 2001. And my grandma had just passed away, and she was down in Florida. So my family and we went down to Florida, and this was on September 10th, 2001. Oh. We go to the funeral in Orlando. Now I'm originally from Chicago. That's where my family lived. So we're down in Orlando, and we get the funeral, beautiful funeral, got to say goodbye to my grandma, went to the airport on 9/11. And so we're at the Orlando airport, and we find out that they're shutting down terminals. All the TVs are off. They're not telling us what's happening. And so my dad, luckily, like he's smartly went and rented a car. So we ended up driving from Orlando, Florida, all the way up to Chicago, listening to the radio the entire time. This is before podcasts. This is before iPhone, right? This is before all that. So we're listening to the radio, and then we stopped at a truck stop and watched the TV, and we saw the planes hit the towers here in New York. And I just remember thinking, I'm like, wow, what happened? Like, how could a airplane pilot be like that terrible? Right? And then it started coming out that there was this guy, Osama bin Laden, and I'm like, man, I'm a kid from the Midwest that feels so insulated. I've never been to either coast before. I mean, I didn't know. I just knew the Midwest. I knew Chicago. I knew Iowa, and that was my world. And so why somebody would do this just like rocked me. And so I followed that thread when I got back to the University of Iowa, and I started reading about terrorism and what happened in the Middle East and why somebody might do this. And so I got it in my head. I was like, I want to be, and I looked at all these different jobs. At that point in time, I didn't know what I wanted to do in life. I was a finance major. I wasn't even good at finance. But I was wondering what's going to be my thing. And so I decided, I looked at the CIA, I read books, fiction, nonfiction, foreign policy magazine, like all this stuff. I took Intro to Islam. I learned how to speak Arabic. Like I was on this path. And so I decided that CIA wasn't right for me because that's your life. But the FBI might be a good place for me to go. So I call up the FBI. I'm like, hey, my name's Bryan. I'm a junior in college. Like, how do I join? I want to be an agent. And they tell me, like, well, all right, Bryan, law degrees are great, but you need 3 years of work experience in order to even apply. And it's very competitive. So have a backup plan and everything. I go, great, I'll see you guys in 3 years. Click. So I find out that another really great job to get is in consulting. So I had no interest really in consulting, but I knew it was a great stepping stone to this job of FBI special agent. Like, yes, right. Exactly. That's exactly how it felt. It felt just like title, FBI. I'll probably be on TV one day, like superhero mentality, right? All that.
Mulder and Scully. This is X-Files time.
Mulder and Scully. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I didn't know, other than these things that I read, of course, I'd never been in the FBI. I never talked to any FBI agent. And so I joined Accenture with the singular purpose of not doing anything at Accenture, but to get closer and closer and closer to applying to the FBI. So I want to fast forward. So I'm at Accenture now for, I think it was 6 years. And I had started off in Chicago in the finance space, moved projects to Washington, D.C. at the Department of Defense. And then I got on a project at the FBI helping design their leadership development program. So I'm essentially in HR at the FBI. And I'm like, dude, this is so cool. I'm in the FBI. I'm working at the J. Edgar Hoover headquarters, in downtown DC, which if you've been there, it's the ugliest building down there. So I'm super pumped. And I'm like, now's the time. I've got great credentials. I've already got my security clearance. I kind of got a sense, because I got a bunch of FBI agent friends now. I got a sense of what the job is, but I wanted to do this on the low. I didn't want to tell anybody.
Right.
And so I applied. And I'll do this because I find it fascinating what the application process is for a special agent. So here's the process. First, you put your resume in. They look at your resume. If you're good enough, they'll bring you in to do a test. The test is very similar to the LSAT, right, which lawyers take before law school. So you take that. If you pass that, you then do a panel interview with FBI agents who are grilling you, and an essay that you have to write based on facts that they give you in terms of what would you do as an investigator. Oh. After that, you then do a physical fitness test. So you literally get on a track, and everything I'm describing now takes over a year to get through. So physical fitness test, if you pass that, then you go into a biological test, eyesight and blood and everything else. And the last thing you do is a polygraph. And the polygraph feels just like the movies, like Meet the Fuckers, like it feels just like that. They sit you down in this like windowless room. You're sitting on, and what they don't know, you always see the little things on the fingers, but what you don't ever see is you actually sit down on this mat that's on the seat, and it's like measuring the pressure of your butt moving. Right? So it's just like, and you got something around your chest, like you are hooked up. Right. So I make it through this entire process. I'm in the polygraph, and I am so pumped. I'm getting ready to leave Accenture now. I've been there about 7 or 8 years at this point. I'm ready to do the FBI. And all of a sudden I get a letter, an envelope in the mail, and it says, your polygraph came back inconclusive. You have to retest. Ooh. I was like, oh, crap. I was like, that's not good.
No.
Because I knew I had lied about one thing on the polygraph. And I sought advice before I took the polygraph. I asked a special agent friend of mine. I said, look, when I was in college playing baseball, I hurt my back. And to get back in playing, I took anabolic steroids. I took 1 round of them. And he said, do not tell them that, because if they putting a needle into you is going to cause off all kinds of red flags and you'll be disqualified. So now I'm stuck. I already told them I have never taken drugs in my life, which I hadn't other than that.
Yeah.
And I already told them in the polygraph that I hadn't, right? And so now I'm stuck because I got caught, and now I got to take this again, and I can't now go back and tell them actually I lied, because that disqualifies you.
Right.
And so what I did is I learned how to beat the polygraph. I took all these classes before taking the polygraph for the second time. And there's all kinds of things like putting a tack in your shoe, biting your tongue when you want to send a stress signal, thinking like mentally about the happiest place in your life when you are telling a lie, like all this stuff. So I go in there really confident the second time, and I'm like, bring on the polygraph. So they ask me all the same questions. And then at the end of it, they take the computer and they put it around, and it looked like a cartoon. Now, this is a tactic that they often use, is even if you didn't lie, even if everything comes out green, they'll ask you and say, hey, like this came up related to drugs, related to violence, related to sexual things, whatever it may be. And so they turn it around and they looked at me, they're like, well, and it says it's like flashing the entire screen, 98% chance of deception. So I'm like, that's bullshit, because I'm not best. So I know you're just trying to get me right now. That's cute. Like, nope, not falling for that. I'm like, no, I am good. I get a second letter in the mail saying your test came back inconclusive, and unfortunately you can no longer go forward you can never apply to be a special agent again.
Oh.
And that's it. Like, that's the law. You're done.
Oh.
And so at that point, I mean, I was now about 8.5 years in to this wanting to do this thing called FBI special agent. And doing 8.5 years of work at Accenture, like I was learning things, of course, but the whole purpose was to do this other thing. So at that point, so that's the first time, like my quit, and the reason I'm one of the world's worst, it wasn't up to me. I had no choice. I hit a wall. Like, it was just not going to happen. And of course, I didn't quit there. I actually went to my client at the FBI and I said, look, here's the story. I applied. This is what I want to do. Here's why I want to do it. Here's what I lied about. Take a look at my results. Like, is there anything you can do? And she came back and said, look, I talked to everybody. And she was very high up at the FBI. She said, I talked to everybody, and we would love to have you as a special agent. But the problem is that if we made an exception to this rule and the information got out, this would be a congressional affair. And so there's nothing we can do. We can give you recommendations for the CIA, the DEA, the ATF. But like, my heart was so set on the FBI. And so at that point, that's when I knew, like, my real quit in that role, like, kicked in. I didn't have a choice. And it was sad, but I was also thankful, because I wonder for other people that are out there, if it's a startup or if it's some other sort of dream that they had and they don't have that hard boundary that was set for me. What if I just kept going and kept beating my head against the wall? I think I probably would have.
Yeah. You're absolutely right.
So that's one of my first and probably highest impact quote. And also, don't lie in polygraphs. That's not a good thing to do.
You're the second person who has told me that very same story, minus the other person.
Get out of here.
Yeah, no, I mean, minus the Accenture part, but getting all the way through it, and then the polygraph. And this person had, I think, and this is like 10 years ago, somebody had passed them a joint one time, and he had taken one puff of a joint, right? Like, I mean, and today that sounds like a comical thing, but 10 years ago I really did actually think this person might have really just done that one, because why would he lie to me? But the same question came up, and the same result happened. But so many quits can happen. Okay, so this is where I live in San Diego. The Encinitas vernacular for this is that, the quits are happening for you. Not that the quits happen to you, right? But have you looked back in retrospect? And I, of course, do not know the answer to this question, so you could absolutely say, no, I have not. But have you ever looked back in retrospect and been like, I'm actually glad that I didn't get to the FBI, because I have done something, I know what you do now, and I think, and you can tell me what you do now, but in my humble opinion, what you do now is something probably only you and very few other people could do. Whereas FBI, anybody who just checks off all those boxes, physically fit, doesn't ever have the steroids, etc., good at polygraph, could do. Have you ever thought that? Like, okay, the universe dealt me this quit because it had a bigger plan for me.
Oh, I mean, this is a scenario I've ran through my head 1,000 times. And when it first happened, I'll tell you what happened right afterwards. But when it first happened, no, like that was everything that I even cared about. And I went through a period, a pretty good period of like what I can probably only describe now is like when I look back as a depression of some sort. Coming out on the other side of that and finding like doing some of this internal work and finding really what is my purpose? Who am I? I look back on that and I recognize all the reasons that I wanted that job, that I wanted that role. And none of them, I shouldn't say none of them, most of them had nothing to do with me. Most of them had getting approval from other people. Like, this guy's got a really cool job. He gets to carry a gun around. I should respect him because he's a special agent. Because I didn't feel like that on the inside. And I look at what that actual job is, and I still have a lot of friends, and I highly, highly respect the FBI. I love what they're doing. I know they've been in the news a lot lately, and that's been pretty rough. But man, the people over there are amazing. And the best thing that could have happened to me is for me not to get in. And because the what I'm doing now and some of the insights that I've come to and some of this work that I'm doing with Dominic and on my own in the sexual health space and the talent space and the purpose space I can't imagine anything being more fulfilling. So I don't know what my life would look like, of course, if I did really take that, do the polygraph right. But I am thankful, so thankful for where I'm at right now. And part of that, I don't know what to exactly attribute this to, but right after I got told no officially from the FBI, just about a week later, I was diagnosed with testicular cancer, and I also had chlamydia at the same time. And so there was that sent me down this whole path that I'm on right now. And it happened back to back.
Wow. Now that had to be a distinctly rough period. You're already in this depression or aiming that way from the job, and then life hits you with cancer. How did you even, just for people who may be struggling, this is a little bit off topic, but how did you even get through such a rough period of like the 1-2-1-2-3 punch that life seemed to have dealt you at that point?
Oh, I numbed it out big time. I numbed it out with alcohol. I numbed it out with sex. I numbed it out with chasing women. I numbed it out. That's how I handled it. I didn't know, at that point in time, I didn't know. I knew I was upset, but I was a dude, like, get over it. Like, keep going, soldier on. You know, oh, I'm sorry, Brian, like, you got a great job and you didn't get into the FBI, right? I kind of gave myself the pity party. And that's how I got through it initially, was just powering through it and lying and numbing myself out and like not taking a look in. And so my body just finally said like, You know, I truly believe that the manifestation for me of testicular cancer was two things. One, you need to pay attention to me, body. Like, Brian, pay attention to me, is what my body was saying to me. Yes. And two, that your power is not in your crotch. Your power is in your heart. Oh. So knock it off. Stop numbing your life out to all this shit. Wow. So that's what has come through me through that process. And you know what? It wasn't right away.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what kind of introspection work did you do that helped you go from numbing to realizing kind of what your body, like you said, was trying to tell you?
Yeah. So the first thing that happened to me is, and this goes back into other stories, but I'll keep this part short. When I started feeling symptoms of like my left nut hurting, I did what a lot of guys do, which is nothing. And I was like, it'll go away. It's not a big deal. Maybe I hit my nut on a doorknob or something when I was walking by. I'm like, that'll go away.
That's common.
That's common. Who doesn't do that every once in a while? So, yeah, but you tell yourself crazy things. You tell yourself like, oh, this must be this. It must be the doorknob over there. Couldn't possibly be something wrong with me. Especially my family jewels. Like, ugh. So it took me 3 months from the time that I was diagnosed to talk to a friend who was a urologist. And he told me that day I was still working. By the way, after the FBI told me no, again, world's worst quitter, I was still working at the FBI. I was still consulting for them. So even after they told me no, I was going in. Like, have you ever been in a relationship too long? Like maybe like stuck around a little too long? Like that was me with the FBI. Like, I was sticking around. So I'm putting my suit on to go into this job that I'm clearly like distraught about. And my friend tells me, you need to go into the hospital right now. This could be serious. I said, no. I just put my suit on. Like, I'm going to go in. He's like, no, like I'm setting you up with my friend right now. Go in. And so I went in, and that's when I was diagnosed with testicular cancer and chlamydia. And at the age of 30, I had never been tested for an STD before.
Wow.
And so that was a wild time. So that when I was diagnosed, you asked me when was the first time I started to take a look inside and started to do the introspection. That was the first time, because before I was just playing, I was out there, I was in the external, I was getting validation. I was like, what is my identity? Look at me, look at me, look at me. And that was the first time looking that doctor in the eyes and being like, well, am I going to die? Like, what are my choices, my chances? He's like, look, it's a 96% survival rate. You got pretty good. I'm like, okay, well, that's good. He said, we're just going to remove your testicle. And I said, excuse me? You can do this differently, right? Like maybe just a part of it or take some pills. He's like, no, we take it out because it moves very fast. I said, okay. Now I have to deal with like, well, a lot of my identity was wrapped around in my sexuality at that point. So I was like, can I still perform? What are women going to think about me now that I have only one testicle? Can I still have a kid? And so I started asking myself all these like existential questions that I've never even like touched before because I was so focused on this other thing. And so when I went through chemotherapy, I ended up writing a blog called One Big Nut. And I wrote it not because I wanted to do introspection, but because I didn't want friends and family and colleagues to bother me with questions while I was going through chemo. And so I could just point them to the blog. And it turns out that was a big mistake because a lot of people went to read that and then came back to me with all of their sexual health situations. And I realized for the first time in my life, like what I was doing is actually being vulnerable on accident.
Yeah.
And it opened up all kinds of conversations. And so that's the start. That's the very start to my other path. But I want to hit one story on this question of introspection because that was just the beginning of it. I did my chemotherapy in Chicago. My parents were gracious and took care of me like the entire time. And I love them, period. And I really love them because they did that. But I went back to DC and I got a bald head now. I'm still at the FBI, still there. And now I'm contemplating like in my life, like, what am I going to do now? Like my entire identity is gone. I have a bald head. I have one nut. I'm in a job that I'm still at the FBI. I'm still there. So my boss asked me, and this was like I was like, ooh, maybe this is it. Maybe this is it. My boss asked me, he's like, hey, I'm doing happy hour today. Do you want to come with me? Because like my boss and my boss's boss, my boss's boss, like the number 5 person at Accenture is going to be at this happy hour and it's just going to be us. I'm like, oh my gosh, great career opportunity, right? And maybe this is my thing. Maybe I'm supposed to have been at Accenture this entire time. I didn't know. Great. Let's do happy hour. So we get there and we're sitting at this pub table and there's 4 of us. And so we get on like this silly topic, a bar topic of what's your spirit animal? 4 dudes at a bar talking to like high level executives. What's your spirit animal?
Wow.
And we answered it in rank order. Like, so the top guy goes, he's like, I'm a lion because, you know, king of the jungle. I got my pride and everything else. And I'm like, ooh, that's a good one. So I'm sitting there like just like watching this answer wave come towards me. So the second guy, like my boss's boss, right? He's like, oh yeah, he's like, I'm a shark because like they never stop moving. They're predators, like they're smooth, they're top of the food chain, apex predator. And I'm like, oh man, okay, so we got the jungle taken care of, we got the ocean taken care of. Like, what's next? Like, what's my animal? Like, what's my animal? I haven't thought about this before. So then my boss goes and he's like, I'm a bald eagle because, you know, we're in DC, America. He's like, I can fly. He's like, I feel like I have like a really great vision over things. And so now it's my turn and I'm like, holy crap, what do I say? I'm like, sometimes I feel like a monkey. I shouldn't say monkey. That's a bad one. And I just blurted out jellyfish. And I was like, you know, I don't know, like a jellyfish. I had like a moment of truth, like in this very awkward situation. And my boss looks at me. I remember like seeing the terror in his eyes that he brought this like junior person with him who's talking about being a jellyfish. And he looks at me and goes, "Oh, you mean like that man of war jellyfish, that like really badass one that can kill people?" And I was like so nervous at this point. I remember my body like buzzing. I was like, "No, no, like you know those like little jellyfish, they have a little iridescent circle in them. They're kind of cute. They float around. They don't even sting." He's like, so when I realized like what I said, and I had this moment of truth, I literally I had 2 sips out of this beer I was drinking. I put it down. I said, "Guys, I've got so much work to do. Thank you for the invite. I need to go home."
Oh my
And
God.
so they just kind of said, they sort of said bye and more or less just kind of turned around the other direction. So I had a 10-minute walk home from the bar to my place, and I'm like cursing myself. Why did I say jellyfish? Like, what would possess me? I never even thought about a freaking jellyfish before. And I realized on that walk, as I was walking, I was like, that's exactly what you feel like right now. You feel like a fucking jellyfish. Like you have no control over your life. You're just floating around in the ocean looking for, like, you'll take any offer that comes by. Like, you want to go to happy hour, Brian. You want to go to this party, Brian. You want to go on this vacation, Brian. Like, you're not setting anything for yourself. You don't even know what you fucking want. And so I started asking myself on that walk these extreme questions. If I had $10 billion, what would I do with it? Didn't have a great answer. Didn't know what I'd do with it. No clue. What really lights you up? What excites you? Like, what are you looking forward to in the next 6 months? Nothing. And that's when I realized, I was like, oh, this is not a great place. And I didn't know where to go. That was the scariest part. So I went home, I sat in my giant beanbag, which is something you do when you're depressed. And I was like, now what? What do I do? And so all I knew at that point was something had to change. And so I called a friend of mine who was working at a different part of Accenture out of the government in New York City. And I said, hey, man, I'm ready for something different. Here's the skill sets that I have. What do you think? And so he invited me out to a role in New York. And that's why I ended up moving to New York 5 years ago.
Wow.
And then the rest of the process is like, well, how did I go from, that was my rock bottom to where I'm at now. But part of the forced quit triggered all of those introspective moments that I didn't know. And I look at people now, especially guys like in their 20s, many in their 30s, where I can see the previous version of me, where like things are good. Like externally, I am decorated, I'm making money, I'm doing my thing, and internally, I'm completely confused.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of empathy and a lot of compassion for guys going through that, and that's why I do a lot of what I do now.
I love that. And I love that you brought up the forced quit because it can look like yours. It can look like, okay, I've gone for something for so long and it didn't happen. Or it can look like I had a professional athlete on. It can look like for them, okay, at some point in time, the team's going to say you're cut. And that thing you've been working for forever and built your identity around, that's it. Like later today, I'm going to be on Knowledge and Mileage with Chris Gethin, bodybuilder extraordinaire. We're going to talk about what happens when bodybuilding ends because something
Wow.
people have wrapped so much of their identity around suddenly gone. I think a lot of people get to that same beanbag jellyfish moment you did. And I really appreciate you sharing that's, like on the outside, you have it all, but the outside is only skin deep or is only what you're seeing on Facebook. And a lot of times, more people than you know have hit that moment of like, yeah, okay, I filled all society's boxes. Like you said, I love that you brought up that the FBI, when you sat down and looked at it, was not about you. It was about what does the FBI
Nothing.
make me look like? The status, the gun, the power, the prestige. Man, that's a great introspection for people who maybe, same thing, say it's professional athletics. Well, what were you getting out of professional athletics? Well, okay, well, yeah, there's a lot of status, or there's this and that, but is that really what you want for your life? What are your goals for your life? And if you don't even know, like you said, what lights you up, that's going to leave you with this, is athletics what lights me up? Is the FBI what lights me up? And then there's that void. And what did you do when you got to that point of realizing, like, okay, I need to start over? Like your friend offered you a position, and that was essentially just to kind of get you out of your, like, kind of shake things up, correct?
Correct.
And what did you do from there insofar as actually finding what to me appears to be your calling now?
I had an inkling when I was at the FBI that we needed some sort of technology, and at the time I was thinking maybe it was an app. They had this ridiculous thing on the subway in DC called "See Something, Say Something," And it's like, hey, if you see a bag laying there, just dial 1-800-267-4545 and let us know and report it. I'm like, this is insane. And so I was in the law enforcement arena, obviously the FBI. I was going to different trade shows, and I was like, I think this is something the FBI and just law enforcement in general needs. And so I started looking into, well, what does it take to create an app like this, and who are the partners that we need to create and figure it all out. And so it was just one inkling that said, hey, there's this new thing called Accenture Digital, and they're building digital experiences right when that started to kick off in New York. And I was like, well, maybe I can go learn really what it takes to build something like that, because I have no clue right now. And that was it. And I just followed that blindly. All I knew was what I was doing wasn't working. There was one little thing that I had some interest in, and I just followed that thread. And that led me down a path of learning exactly what I wanted to learn and finding a city that I love to live in. And then I started, and this has been the path since. Glad we're talking about this.
Yay.
Because what has happened since is I got more curious. I started following other threads that started coming to me. And anytime, just like this podcast that we're on right now, where I started to feel some of that anxiety around I prefer to avoid that and not go there. I was like, ooh, that's where I need to go.
Yeah.
So instead of avoiding it, and if I look back at the FBI thing, if I would have not avoided, and this is fact because I talked to my FBI agent friends about this, if I would have just told them that I did steroids one time, no problem, I would be in.
Wow.
Not a problem. Enough time had elapsed between the time that I did it and the time that if I would have told them, it would have been 100% fine. So I would have been in, no problem. Wow. And so what I learned from that and these other, and not listening to my body, same exact thing, avoidant. So I decided that when something feels anxious, I'm going to follow that fucking thread and see where it goes. And I'm going to get curious and leave it open and not really have any sort of outcome in mind. And that path of curiosity and openness has been so much fun over the past 5 years. A friend of mine at that point in time, I was walking to work as a 15-minute walk to work, and he had sent me something he found on YouTube. It was a Les Brown, who's a motivational speaker. And I started listening to this guy's YouTube videos on the way to work as I was walking. I'm like, this guy's speaking my language. He's talking some crazy stuff. And I started to feel a little bit less crazy. I was like, you know what? And then I got with my friend who I had called, who lived in New York at the time, to talk about sexual health stuff. And we were talking about the ridiculousness of how hard it is to get tested and how much it costs and everything else. And so we got together, and I said, you know what? I went to this company, Accenture Digital, to figure out how to do a law enforcement app, but I'm really feeling called with all these conversations I've been having about sexual health to create a new experience for sexual health. And then that led me down a path to going to bars, restaurants, parks, talking to women and asking them about their sexual health experiences because they were going to be my customers. This was still not altruistic. This was all I want to build something. I want to create something. I'm not being a good guy at this point. But I'm asking women what they're going through. And I learned about things about guys asking them if they have a condom. I learned about things called stealthing, when a guy takes off a condom while having sex and not asking permission. And I started hearing all these other stories from a completely different perspective. And I said, holy shit, this is I have my perspective, but these other perspectives from women are wild. And so I ended up, we created the company. We created the first digital app where you can video chat with a doctor, get tested for STIs, have the result in the phone. So you can then start having the conversation with a partner, because it was that conversation. This is a whole other story, but it was that conversation that I couldn't have with myself. I couldn't have with partners. The reason I hadn't been tested until I was 30. And so my big want, and so this is the other kind of indicators, being curious. It's also where was my biggest pain points, if I'm being honest with myself from the past. And my biggest pain point was this not being able to talk about sex. And of course I was doing it. This comes from upbringing and Christianity and everything else. But what I couldn't talk about before, I numbed out with alcohol. Right, for round two of alcohol. I got to college, and all of a sudden I'm like, well, I feel weird about this premarital sex. I was told I shouldn't do it. Right, and so I numbed it out. So that way I could go say hi to a woman at a bar. I could have sex, not think about it, and then she could go home, and I could sober up, and then we're good to go. And I did that for 15 plus years.
Wow. Oh my goodness. There's so much in there. I love it. Yeah. Continue. Yeah,
so I'll wrap this part of it up. The purpose of me creating this company was to change the conversation. to allow people to like have the tools to be able to continue, like be able to ask the questions and have guys feel more comfortable. Like, I don't have to be a performance. I can ask, I can show her my results and see if she responds in kind. And starting, so my big thing is like finding fit. Like, where do visions start to align? How do people in organizations start to like help each other out, as opposed to like, what can you do for me, person? So that's a whole different path. But that's some of the introspection and threads that I found after I was at this like really low, crappy place.
I appreciate that, and I love how you said, "Okay, I wasn't doing this altruistically. This is how it unfolded. You had a plan." But I think somewhere what I'm hearing is that like you've realized that deep down, the thing that you were doing to ostensibly make money was dealing with a pain point you'd had, and also some big part of your life, like the testicular cancer and the chlamydia diagnosis all come at the same time at this seemingly like pivotal moment, to where you then, it seems like it kind of a calling found itself out of that. Like you're the one having these conversations, which is, I am from Southern Illinois. I am right with you on the upbringing and the stigma and I never had a sex talk with my parents. That did not happen.
Yeah.
and
Not happen.
No. And I love that. And the secret reason I did have you on that I didn't tell you is because when I see what so like, you and Dominic have the thing, and I was like, let me check out Bryan's background, because I always just want to check out A-Fester's background, because I know they have fascinating things that, there's going to be a quit somewhere. And I think it was either on your website or LinkedIn or something. It says like, I might botch this, but it says like testicular cancer and chlamydia survivor. And as a doctor, I definitely had to laugh at myself, because chlamydia is not fatal.
Right.
So like chlamydia, I've never seen anybody put chlamydia survivor, but also nobody's ever seen somebody put professional quitter on their LinkedIn. And that's what mine says. And I was like, this is a kindred soul, because I can tell what you were doing, which is like, I'm going to draw attention to something that seems shocking and is not phrased in a way people are used to phrasing it, because a conversation needs to happen.
Needs to happen. And it's universal.
Totally.
There's nobody out there that hasn't quit. There's nobody out there, as far as I know, without genitals.
Right.
There's no one out there, for the most part, that's not having sex. Like, there's a thing. But most people, right? It's mostly universal. And I would say that really what we're talking about in any of this is the connection and the communication piece of it all. So in that way, very universal.
Yes. And actually, the thread that I identified it for both of us is quitting stigma. Because there's a stigma around quitting, There's a stigma around sexual health, and that's why I was like, what you're doing with your chlamydia survivorship is helping people quit the stigma. And that's why I felt like I've got to have Bryan on, because that's just huge. Stigma
I really appreciate that. And I felt that exact same thing. I forget which podcast that I was listening to. I think her last name was Archer or Asher.
Oh yeah,
Kirsten, yes. And you mentioned the stigma of quit. And I was like, oh, I'm totally stigmatized by that. Yep, that's it. Like, that's my thing. I've got all my shit worked out when it came to STDs and sexual conversations. And I can talk about dicks in the air, but like, I tell you what, when it comes to quitting, not quite ready to go there yet. And here we are.
And then you were just like sitting over there like, never message me. Please never message me.
I know that you messaged me. I'm like, oh no. I have to say yes.
That's so funny. I can just imagine like your face when my little thing pops up. You're like, this, because Kirsten's episode was like 6 months ago, if not more. You've been dreading this message for a long time.
A while. Yes.
That's so funny. Well, I just want, like, I love to bring voices that are great at telling their story, but also that are great at telling other people's stories. And like, for example, this is, long after you and I set this up, but I think it was in the past 2 days, you reposted something Dominic had put on Facebook about it's kind of peripherally Me Too related, but to see these two guys who have not gone through Me Too be able to express it in this way and care enough to share. That's the kind of voices I want to have on. I want other people to like look up Bryan Stacy because I'm interested in what he's doing, and maybe they'll contact you for some other reason, because I love what you're doing overall, and it's a special breed of person who's gotten through what I know you got through, which is the whole I'm brought up in the Midwest. This is what society tells me to do. I had a come to Jesus moment at yours was at 30. I have one like every 10 years. You know,
Oh God, I'm almost 40.
it's coming.
It's coming. It's coming.
Well, no, I had my first one at 20, and then I think I had another one at like 31, and then I think I had another one last Tuesday when I decided like all this has to go. But yeah, I just really appreciate the vulnerability because it's the only way, like you said, we're going to connect is everybody has sexual health issues. Everybody has things that they want to quit, and not talking about it is the way stigma builds and shame builds.
Yeah. Yeah. I so appreciate you saying that. And I think one of the most fulfilling parts of this journey started off, as I mentioned, in the bars and parks and restaurants, talking about women about their sexual health stuff. And I also connected when I launched my company. I knew like, this was not a topic I talked about. I knew nobody. I didn't even know there was an industry. And there's a group of women out here in New York, and they run something called the Women of Sex Tech. And they've got a lot of different companies that are anything from sex toys to podcasts to services to anything in the space, in the sexual health and sex space. And man, they took me under their wing and taught me so much. And I ended up going to a bunch of like women-led events and mostly women there. And I realized I'm like, wow, like I can actually just sit here and I don't have to do anything. I don't have to like voice my opinion. I don't have to like, and when I did step out of line in some way, shape, or form, they were beautiful in helping for me to understand like what I was doing and why it wasn't serving the space.
Wow.
And so when Dominic and I got together and we started talking just on our own, like on Saturdays having coffee together about all the real sex stuff. Like I like to call it like locker room talk if everybody was telling the truth.
Yes.
About all the insecurities about performances and condoms and conversations and what we actually really are looking for really out of sex and what that really gives us. And then I started telling him about these women run events that I went to, and they're like, man, like, I'm like, this is a lot of fun. Like, if other guys knew what we know now, this would change their entire trajectory. Like I look at my 15 years of like numbing out and chasing as a pretty big waste of time. And I do wonder if I had a better handle on that part of my life at a younger age, what I would be doing. I probably wouldn't be talking about dicks on podcasts. I'd probably be doing something else, but it happens to be that's my pain point. Right. And so like while talking about dicks on a podcast isn't my thing, it's something I do and I get fulfillment from because that was a pain point for me. So I appreciate you saying that. And I love what we're doing. And you know what? We're still on the journey. Like we're still figuring it out and we're still messing up. And we call in women to like, let us know, right? If we're doing something, if it triggers you, great, because here's what we can do. We can learn from that. And then we can translate that to other guys in a way that they understand. And I feel like that's how we start to build this healing that can happen between the masculine and the feminine and men and women. And like, I think my feeling is that we are at the precipice right now we had this like thing that had to happen called Me Too, where a big wake up call happened. And I'm starting to see like really great leaders in this area starting to come together. And this masculine and feminine dance is starting to happen. And I'm like so excited about that. And I believe that when we find or allow our purpose to come within us, which happens oftentimes by quitting, yes. Then we have that confidence that allows that space for curiosity to flow. And we're not triggered so easily by words or actions or what have you. And so like, that's where I get really excited about helping people find that journey and creating the systems that allow people to find their thing, find their purpose, find there's peace in that, and find the healing.
Oh, that's beautiful. I think you've done that by example. Like, just look at your story. You've gone from the furthest thing from somebody who's talking about sexual health all the way through to where it didn't necessarily start it as this is my calling, this is my passion, but a passion developed when you got more exposed. And that I think is a great model for how it often happens for people. And it's funny because the first person to discuss this on my show was Dominic Quartuccio, your co-host, which is that whole charge, kind of negative, heavy feeling about you got to go find your calling. And what he had said was he didn't say, I'm going to go find my calling. He said, I'm going to go just spend the next 2 years before I quit. He had like a quit planned 2 years down the road. I'm going to spend it just doing whatever I want. And then he looked back and he's like, whatever I want happened to be like personal development after personal development. Like he saw this pattern when he did what you said, which is just get curious. And there may have been pain points in there for him that he found like, okay, yeah, if I was really feeling stuck in this area, I don't know, addicted to technology or any other part of what he was struggling with, now he speaks on it and he addresses his pain points. And I love that that's exactly what you've said. It's like, in not so many words, but like your calling will manifest itself if you give it the space and you stop like, okay, this is what society says. Okay, who cares? This is what other people think are going to be status filled. Who cares? What do I want? Let's stop and figure out what the jellyfish actually wants.
Yeah, figure it out. And you don't have to go to jellyfish to figure it out. That was my path. Whenever I tell that story, I'm still embarrassed by it. It still comes up. I'm like, jellyfish? Really? Somebody asked me one time after I told that story, they're like, you should get a jellyfish tattoo. I'm like, no, that's the opposite of what I should get. I don't want a jellyfish tattoo.
Do you have a new spirit animal?
I don't. I don't. I don't. I'm like cursed by this jellyfish now.
That's hilarious. I mean, my favorite part of the story was that they tried to like feed you a Man of Ray, like an appropriate jellyfish version. You're like, no, the one that will do no harm to anybody. I'm just iridescent and floating. And they're like,
I'm just here doing nothing with my life.
Did you make a left at Burning Man? Like, how did you end up at this happy hour?
Oh, wow.
Bryan,
yes.
That was so beautiful. Thank you so much for everything you have shared. I loved how we had no plans for this podcast and it went every place I could have ever wanted it to go.
I knew we'd be opening up stories and finding the holes to go deep. So I really thank you for creating the space for this kind of conversation, one. And two, following whatever universal signal you had to reach out to me and put me in this very awkward personal situation of like, I gotta talk about this.
I'm telling you, I'm glad that you that you went ahead and said, hey, okay, let's talk, despite every last fiber in your body saying no, because so many people are going to be inspired by this. So thank you so much for being on.
Thank you. And if anybody wants to, maybe wants to check out what we're doing, go to doinnerwork.com, probably the same place that Dominic sent everybody. And there you will talk. We have live events called The Discerning Dick. We have our own podcast, Man Amongst Men, but that's the place to find me.
Yeah. So forgive me. We're going to back up and I'm just going to have my editor fix this because
cool.
I got distracted from doing the whole, tell everybody where they can find you because it says that my battery is dying. So anyway, let me just say, and then also the Skype connection cut out. So I'm going to say, Bryan, please tell people where they can find you.
Okay. I can be found at Talking Nut on Instagram. And if you want to see a lot of the work that Dominic and I are doing together, they can go to doinnerwork.com. And you'll see our podcast is on there, Man Amongst Men. And you'll see the Discerning Dick live events that we do here in New York. And we've got a couple of retreats coming up here in the next few months.
Love it. Thank you so much for being on, Bryan.
Yeah, thank you. This has been amazing.
All right. And for everybody else out there, until next time, happy quitting.